There are pains that no one sees. They leave no scars on the body, and they are not easy to express in words. Among them, perhaps one of the heaviest, is the pain of realizing that the child, who was once so loved, so eagerly awaited, seems not to recognize the value of the mother who gave him everything. This wound is quiet and deep. It does not appear in a single moment. It accumulates slowly through small gestures of indifference, unspoken words, and meetings that become increasingly rare. A mother, who was once the center of her child's universe, the source of protection, love, and safety, now feels strange in the presence of her own child. Hugs become formal, conversations grow cold, and a presence that was once welcomed is now met with caution. But what causes these painful changes? Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, viewed a person as a field of unconscious forces. According to him, the most intense relationships are also the most complex. Estrangement between a mother and child is rarely conscious or intentional. It is the result of deep emotional processes, often beginning in childhood, shaped by desires, fears, and conflicts that do not always surface into consciousness. Freud believed that we love and hate the same people, and this ambivalence is an inevitable part of our human condition. In the case of a mother, the primary figure in shaping the psyche, these contradictory emotions are intertwined even more intensely. A child, in search of their own identity, needs to distance themselves, create boundaries, and gain autonomy. But at the same time, they may experience feelings of guilt, resentment, and disappointment, which unconsciously turn against the one who gave them life. In this video, we will explore 7 possible psychological reasons, based on Freud's theories, that help explain why a child may devalue their own mother. You will see that, in most cases, such behavior is not a reflection of a lack of love, but rather an echo of internal battles, poorly healed emotional wounds, and unconscious defense mechanisms that the child builds to protect themselves. If you have ever felt invisible, ignored, or belittled by the person to whom you devoted so many years of your life, know that your pain is entirely valid, but also understand that often it is not about your failure, but about the conflicts that the other person carries within themselves. This video is not intended to evoke sadness or fuel resentment. Its goal is to shed light on this hidden dynamic so that you can see the situation more clearly and uldiana system, perhaps with greater compassion, including for yourself. Understanding is the first step toward liberation from the guilt that does not belong to you. To understand means to lift a burden from your heart, to stop carrying a responsibility that was never truly yours. Understanding is also an act of self-love, an acknowledgement that a mother's value does not depend on her child's recognition, but exists in and of itself. Perhaps today, you are searching for answers. Maybe you are simply seeking relief from a pain you don't know how to name. Let this video be for you what Freud called working through, a process in which, by bringing to light what was hidden, we finally begin to heal. Reason 1. Unresolved Oedipus complex. Sigmund Freud, laying the foundations of psychoanalysis, noted that one of the most intense and universal conflicts of childhood is the so-called Oedipus complex. He described this phenomenon as a combination of loving and hostile feelings that children develop toward their parents, especially toward the mother figure. In the early years of life, a child perceives the mother as the source of protection, love, and survival. She is their first love, the first object of desire, and the first safe harbor. At the same time, They perceive the father's presence as a natural obstacle to the exclusivity of this bond. Unconsciously, the child wants to occupy an absolute, central place in the mother's heart. They want to be everything to her, without divisions, without rivals. This desire, as the child grows, encounters the resistance of reality. The father, or a fatherly figure, imposes limitations. Society enforces rules, and the mother herself gradually teaches the child that they cannot be her entire world. According to Freud, this initial frustration is necessary. It is through it that the child learns to differentiate themselves, to understand that they are not the center of everything, and to accept that love can be shared. However, not every child passes through this stage without emotional scars. When the Oedipus complex is not resolved in a healthy way, it remains active in the person's unconscious, influencing their future relationships, especially with their mother. What happens when this resolution fails? An adult child may experience ambivalent feelings toward their mother without realizing it. They may deeply love her and at the same time resent her. They may crave her approval, but simultaneously reject her to assert their autonomy. They may feel guilt for their contradictory emotions and, to rid themselves of this feeling, emotionally distance themselves. This distancing, often interpreted as coldness, ingratitude, or disrespect, is, in fact, an unconscious attempt to resolve a conflict that was never fully understood. The child needs, in some way, to kill the symbolic bond that ties them to emotional dependence on the mother. They need to assert themselves as an individual, even if it means devaluing or ignoring the person who, paradoxically, was the foundation of their upbringing. Freud explains that, for the unconscious, separation from the mother is experienced as an internal struggle between the desire to belong and the need for freedom. This struggle can generate such profound guilt that the ego defends itself by transforming it into indifference or veiled criticism. It's not that the son doesn't love his mother. Rather, to protect himself from the pain associated with acknowledging this ambivalence, he chooses the path of denial. This dynamic is even more pronounced in cultures where autonomy and independence are overvalued, and emotional dependence is seen as weakness. The child, wanting to be recognized as an adult, believes they must break the symbolic ties with their mother, often doing so abruptly, without realizing the full depth of what is at stake. In some cases, the relationship may become marked by unfair criticism, lack of recognition, and painful emotional distance for both. The child unconsciously projects onto the mother childhood disappointments, unresolved guilt, and suppressed desires. The mother, in turn, feels the loss but does not understand the hidden reasons for the estrangement. Freud did not blame the child or the mother. He understood that these processes are part of the deep structure of the human psyche. Recognizing this dynamic does not mean accepting abuse or justifying painful behavior, but it means understanding that, in many cases, the pain arises not from a lack of love, but from an internal struggle that every person faces while trying to become themselves. When we look at these relationships through the eyes of a psychoanalyst, we understand that behind the child's contempt or indifference, there may paradoxically lie an emotional bond so strong that living with it consciously has become unbearable. It is the burden of an old, tangled love, full of desires and prohibitions that have never been fully worked through. If you've noticed such a dynamic in your life, know that it is not a personal failure. It is an invitation to understand the invisible roots of human relationships and, above all, to free yourself from the guilt you should not bear. For, as Freud taught, Awareness of the unconscious is the true liberation of the soul. If you enjoy such reflections, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single video. Reason 2. Projection of guilt and frustration. Among Freud's deepest contributions was the realization that much of what we feel and project is shaped by internal conflicts that do not reach consciousness. When adult reality does not meet the expectations formed in childhood, it is natural to feel disappointment, pain, and helplessness. However, the ego, fragile in the face of these emotions, tries to protect itself, and one way it does so is by shifting the blame onto someone else. In the context of the relationship between a mother and child, this projection is particularly intense. The mother, as the first figure of love and care, also becomes the first object onto which life's disappointments are projected. When an adult child faces professional, emotional, or personal difficulties, their unconscious may look for someone to blame for their pain, and often that responsibility falls on the mother. This dynamic, though painful, is not conscious. The child does not rationally think, "I'm going to blame my mother for my failures." On the contrary, it is an automatic process driven by an unconscious desire to preserve a sense of self-worth. Admitting personal shortcomings, wrong choices, or dealing with the complexities of adult life would be too painful. Thus, blaming the mother becomes a defense against psychological suffering. Freud called this mechanism projection. Projection is the tendency to attribute to others the feelings, impulses, or guilt that actually belong to us. A son, disappointed by his own limitations, projects the source of his problems onto his mother. "If I'm not happy, it's because my mother made a mistake with me." This unconscious illusion is more comfortable than confronting the reality that suffering is often an inevitable part of life, regardless of the circumstances. Another important aspect is that, for the son's unconscious, the mother represents not only a real person, but also a symbolic image of unconditional protection. She was expected to provide absolute love, complete understanding, and limitless ability to resolve pain and needs. When, inevitably, the mother fails to live up to this idealized image due to human limitations or life circumstances, the child feels betrayed. This disappointment, though not expressed verbally, accumulates in the depths of the unconscious and may manifest in adulthood as resentment. This resentment is expressed not only in harsh words or withdrawal. Sometimes it appears in more subtle forms: constant coldness, neglect disguised as indifference, or veiled criticism that seems never-ending. The child, without realizing it, is saying, "You were supposed to be perfect so that I could be happy, and since you weren't, now you carry my bitterness." Freud viewed this projection as part of the struggle between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. The pleasure principle wants to live without suffering, without frustration. The reality principle, however, demands that we accept the limitations of the world, of others, and of ourselves. When the reality principle manifests painfully, an emotionally immature ego still tries to blame the first figure of attachment. This realization does not lessen the pain a mother feels when she becomes the object of such projection. It does not justify ingratitude or unfairness, but it offers a new perspective. The child's contempt is often a reflection of their internal struggle, not an unfair judgment of the love they received. It is important to recognize that, in many cases, this projection process can be amplified by unconscious family patterns. If the family had silent reproaches, stifling expectations, or poorly defined roles, The child may carry into their life a tendency to seek someone to blame for their dissatisfaction. Since the mother is the primary figure, she becomes the favored target for this unconscious need to find someone responsible for life's suffering. Understanding this dynamic allows the mother to free herself from the burden of guilt that does not belong to her. She can see that her son, even if he does not realize it, is fighting an internal battle that he must resolve himself, not her. And often, the greatest gesture of love is recognizing this silent pain without taking it as her own. Freud taught that healing begins when we can look at our projections and understand that what we see in others is often a reflection of what we have not yet healed in ourselves. This realization, even if painful, is the beginning of true emotional freedom. With this in mind, let's move on to the next reason, where we will explore another aspect of this estrangement: the deep disappointment of the unconscious, striving for exclusivity. Reason 3. Frustration of the unconscious striving for exclusivity. From the first moments of life, infants form a deep bond with their mothers. In the child's eyes, she is the center of the world, the source of safety, nourishment, love, and protection. This initial bond, charged with emotional intensity, creates an unconscious expectation of being the sole object of maternal love, occupying an exclusive place in her heart. For the first few months, this illusion is somewhat maintained. The mother, absorbed in caregiving, devotes almost all her attention to the child. The infant, not yet able to distinguish themselves from the world, feels like a part of it. At this stage, there is no clear separation between self and other. The mother is an extension of themselves, and the love she gives seems absolute. However, over time, reality sets in. Other people appear: father, siblings, relatives, friends. The demands of adult life take precedence. The mother cannot and should not remain exclusively devoted to her children. She must share her attention, energy, and affection. For a young child, this change is experienced as a betrayal. It is a deep narcissistic wound because it reveals a painful truth: they are not the absolute center of the universe. The exclusivity that seemed guaranteed is suddenly under threat, and this realization generates anger, sadness, insecurity, and, above all, a sense of loss. Freud described this process as an inevitable part of healthy psychological development. Children must learn that love can be shared, that others exist, and that the world does not revolve around their needs. But not all children can cope with this loss in a balanced way. When the unconscious striving for exclusivity is not properly overcome, it turns into hidden resentment. This resentment often lies dormant for years, waiting for the right circumstances. In adolescence or adulthood, it may manifest as coldness, criticism, contempt, or distancing from the mother. The child does not say, "It hurts me because you didn't give me exclusive love." Instead, they act as if she failed to fulfill a duty that was, in reality, impossible to fulfill. In the unconscious, the mother becomes the embodiment of the first major disappointment in life, no matter how much she loved, cared, or sacrificed. For a child still carrying this wound, she symbolizes the loss of the illusion of uniqueness and absoluteness. And this loss, though necessary for growth, causes pain. In many cases, this unconscious pain is amplified by specific family events. The birth of a sibling, parental separation, or changes in family structure can intensify the feeling that the mother preferred someone else, neglected, or betrayed her own child. These perceptions, however distorted, become fixed in the unconscious, and shape how the child perceives the mother moving forward. Freud emphasized that the unconscious is timeless. Emotions rooted in childhood do not simply vanish with the years. They continue to influence thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. Thus, an adult child who seems indifferent or critical of their mother may, without realizing it, be reliving the pain of not being the sole object of her unconditional love. This understanding, far from diminishing the pain, offers a new perspective. Often, distancing or devaluing is an expression of an unresolved childhood wound, not a real judgment of the mother's value. Accepting that maternal love can never be exclusive is not easy for the inner child that lives within every person. It requires deep emotional work that few undertake consciously. Many choose the path of criticism, distance, and coldness because it is easier to reject than to experience the pain of loss. By understanding this dynamic, a mother can free herself from the guilt that sometimes torments her. She can realize that her mistake was not in loving too little, but in simply being human with limitations, needs, and other connections. And if her child cannot understand this, it is because they are still silently struggling with the unattainable demands of their inner child. Freud taught us that growing up means accepting the fundamental losses of life: the loss of fusion with the mother, the loss of exclusivity, the loss of illusions. It is through these losses that we build our true identity. Let this realization bring a little more peace to every mother who feels forgotten, for the love given, even if unacknowledged, remains an invisible foundation in the soul of the one who received it. Reason 4. Idealization and disappointment. In childhood, the mother occupies an almost sacred place in the child's imagination. She is perceived as the source of unconditional protection, a refuge from fear, the answer to all needs. This infantile perspective, not yet able to grasp the complexity of human life, idealizes the mother as perfect, omnipotent, and tireless. To the child, the mother is almost a silent deity, capable of everything and incapable of nothing. This idealization is, to some extent, necessary. It creates the foundation of emotional security on which the child builds their perception of the world. Knowing that there is someone absolutely reliable and loving allows the child to face life's first challenges boldly. The problem arises when, over time, this ideal image inevitably collides with reality. As the child grows, they begin to realize that their mother is human. She has flaws, limitations, anxieties, and weaknesses. She gets angry, tired, absent, makes decisions that don't always please them. She makes mistakes, like all people. This realization marks a rupture in the child's imagination. The mother, once idealized, is now perceived more critically. For many people, this process of de-idealization is natural and healthy. It is part of emotional maturity to recognize that another person is not perfect but still worthy of love. However, for those who cannot navigate this transition, the mother's fall from the pedestal of perfection is experienced as a betrayal. A son who cannot cope with this disappointment turns it into resentment. He is angry at the mother for not living up to his unconscious expectations. Instead of integrating the real image of the mother, a person with strengths and flaws, he rejects reality and clings to resentment. This rejection manifests in devaluing, coldness, and constant criticism. Freud understood this dynamic within the framework of affective ambivalence. The same object, in this case the mother, can be loved and hated simultaneously. This internal conflict generates guilt and discomfort, prompting the person to use defense mechanisms to cope with psychological suffering. One of the most common mechanisms is negative idealization. If the mother cannot be perfect, she is perceived as entirely inadequate. There is no room for nuance, for accepting complexity. A childish mindset remains, now inverted. If she is not perfect, she is flawed. If she is flawed, she does not deserve attention. This difficulty in accepting another person's imperfection actually reflects a difficulty in accepting one's own imperfection. The child who rejects their mother's humanity also rejects their own humanity. They demand from another what they fear finding in themselves: infallibility, errors, vulnerability. Often, this disappointment is reinforced by specific moments when the child felt helpless or misunderstood. A single harsh word, an unexplained absence, or an inability to protect can be enough for the child to fixate in their unconscious the feeling that they were betrayed by the person they trusted most. In adulthood, these poorly processed experiences resurface as chronic resentment. A son, unable to name the deep roots of his resentment, blames the mother for his current unhappiness and, as a defense mechanism, effectively distances himself, devalues her qualities, and refuses to acknowledge her importance. It is important to understand that such behavior stems not from a lack of love, but from an inability to reconcile love and disappointment. Freud teaches us that maturity lies in accepting that those we love are imperfect, and that despite this, they still deserve our affection. Emotional maturity lies in the ability to sustain love even in the face of another person's flaws. For mothers, understanding this dynamic can be liberating. It can help them realize that their child's coldness or criticism is not a reflection of their worth as a person or as a mother, but the result of internal struggles that belong to the child. She should not feel guilty for not being perfect. No one is. Human life is made up of imperfections, and true love is the one that flourishes, not despite them, but because of them. If it feels like your child harshly judges you, remember, your humanity does not diminish the love you offer. On the contrary, it is in your humanity that the beauty of your devotion lies. And even if he does not yet see it, the love you gave remains a silent foundation supporting him in the depths of his soul. Reason 5. Resentment toward childhood dependence. In the early years of life, a child is entirely dependent on their mother. Without her, they would not survive. This state of absolute vulnerability forms the deepest emotional structure of a person. The mother is the source of life, warmth, nourishment, and protection. For the child, she embodies everything. However, over time, the child develops a natural need for autonomy. They need to build their identity, assert their independence, and explore the world on their own terms. This transition from dependence to autonomy is one of the most delicate transitions in psychic life. According to Freud, childhood dependence, though natural, leaves ambivalent traces. On one hand, it fosters gratitude and attachment. On the other, it breeds resentment. In the unconscious, such complete dependence on another person evokes feelings of humiliation and helplessness. These feelings, though muted by tenderness and conscious love, do not disappear. They remain latent, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. As the child grows and seeks to assert themselves as an individual, memories of dependence can become uncomfortable. They want to prove to themselves and the world that they are strong, self-sufficient, capable of existing without attachments. To do this, They often must reject or minimize the figure that symbolizes their childhood vulnerability, the mother. This rejection is not always overt. It may manifest in small gestures of indifference, in silences, in veiled criticism. Ultimately, it is not the mother herself who is rejected, but what she represents, the memory of a time when survival entirely depended on another. Freud describes this mechanism as a psychic need for a symbolic break with the maternal figure so that the individual can fully emerge as a subject. It is a kind of second separation after the physical one, an emotional labor. When this symbolic separation is not experienced in a healthy way, the child may resort to devaluing as a defense strategy. By devaluing their mother, they also devalue their own memory of dependence. They may tell themselves, "She's not that important. She wasn't that significant. I achieved everything on my own." These narratives are not created consciously. They are unconscious defenses against the pain associated with acknowledging the depth of the bond and the fragility of what once existed. In societies where independence and personal strength are overvalued, this process is amplified. Showing dependence, even emotional dependence, is seen as a sign of weakness. As a result, the child feels pressure to erase from their history any trace that testifies to their past vulnerability. The mother, unaware of this hidden dynamic, experiences the pain of estrangement, ingratitude, and coldness. This pain is valid. It is the pain of someone who gave everything and received silence or distancing in return. But, in the light of psychoanalysis, we can see that this pain is not caused by a lack of love. It is caused by the child's difficulty in reconciling two truths within themselves: that they were once entirely dependent and that they now want to be fully autonomous. Freud viewed this conflict as a fundamental struggle in human development, the desire to be free without denying one's roots. The problem is that the path to this freedom often involves denying the past, devaluing those who made the first steps possible. Recognizing this fact can help a mother lift the burden of guilt and resentment. She can understand that her selflessness was not in vain, even if her son cannot express his gratitude today. The dependence he rejects, paradoxically, allowed him to go so far. Without the love, care, and support he received in childhood, the independence he so values would not have been possible. This realization does not eliminate the pain but transforms it. It turns the pain of rejection into compassion for the son's emotional immaturity. It transforms resentment into calm. A son who devalues his mother does not erase presentado system, the history that brought her here. His very existence is living proof of the love he received, even if his gestures and words do not acknowledge it. The truth remains etched, invisible, in the deepest layers of the soul. Freud reminds us that maturity is accepting one's origins with gratitude, without needing to deny them to affirm oneself. Some children reach this maturity, others may never do so, but this does not diminish the value of what was given. Love, even unacknowledged, is one of the highest expressions of the human soul, and every mother who has loved in this way carries a greatness that neither time, silence, nor distance can erase. Reason 6. Introjection of a critical father. In his exploration of psychological development, Freud described the process of introjection, the internalization by the child of parental figures, their attitudes, values, and judgments. It is through introjection that the superego, the psychic entity regulating morality, guilt, and expectations, is formed, which a person carries throughout their life. When we talk about the relationship between a mother and child, The figure of the father or paternal authority exerts a profound influence, even if it is not consciously recognized. If, in childhood, a child observes a father who criticizes, belittles, or treats the mother coldly, these attitudes may be absorbed and reproduced later without conscious reflection. For the child, parents are the first models of what is right and wrong, what should be loved or rejected. If the father, embodying strength and authority, treats the mother with contempt, even subtly, the child, wanting to be accepted and loved, is inclined to align with this view. In this way, they internalize a devalued image of their mother, even if she was loving, devoted, and present. This process does not occur rationally. It happens at the deepest levels of psychic formation. The child does not consciously choose to devalue their mother. They simply repeat the patterns observed and introjected in childhood. Over the years, these unconscious impressions become part of their internal structure. The mother is often perceived not as she truly is, but through an inherited critical filter. Thus, emotional injustice becomes entrenched. Freud noted that the formation of the superego is heavily influenced by how a child perceives their parents. If the home is filled with disrespect, humiliation, or contempt, these experiences shape the child's understanding not only of others, but also of themselves. If the mother was belittled, the child may grow up with the conviction that she is indeed inferior, less worthy, undeserving of love and recognition. This conviction, crystallized in the unconscious, determines their attitude toward life in adulthood, often without fully realizing it. Another aspect emphasized by Freud is that children feel a need to align with the figure they perceive as stronger to ensure emotional security. If the father exhibits dominant authority and disqualifies the mother, the child may adopt this perspective to secure their own safety. They will repeat the same critical remarks, maintain the same emotional distance, and reproduce the same coldness, not out of malice but out of unconscious loyalty to the model presented to them. This internalization of a critical view of the mother creates profound distortions in affective perception. Even when the child loves the mother, this love is tainted by the often silent conviction that she is not worthy of full admiration. For the unconscious, this conflict between love and contempt is unbearable. To resolve this internal tension, the child often chooses the path of devaluing. Frequently, these introjected beliefs surface during moments of conflict or stress. The mother becomes the favored target of harsh criticism, merciless judgments, and an attitude that denies all the love she gave over the years. For a mother unaware of this invisible dynamic, the blow is deep and devastating. Understanding the introjection of a critical father does not justify the pain caused, but it sheds light on the fact that the devaluing expressed by the child often stems not from real interactions with the mother, but from inherited and unquestioned behavioral patterns. It is important to remember that the father is not always the sole actor in this dynamic. Other authority figures, grandparents, step-parents, or even society as a whole, can reinforce derogatory views of women, especially in cultures where the role of women has historically been diminished. When these ideas are absorbed in childhood, they become part of the lens through which the child interprets the mother's value. And until that lens is questioned, affective injustice will persist. For a mother who feels undervalued today, recognizing this truth can bring relief. The contempt she receives does not speak to who she is or the love she gives. It speaks to old voices still echoing in her son's mind, voices that do not belong to her but that he carries unconsciously. Freud teaches us that emotional freedom begins when we can distinguish what is ours from what has been imposed on us. Perhaps one day the child will undertake this inner work. Perhaps never, but regardless, the mother's value remains untouched. It does not depend on whether others acknowledge it. It is inherent, woven into the very act of love, care, support, and presence, even in silence, even in ingratitude. Reason 7. Suppressed desire for freedom and guilt. Maturity is, among other things, a process of gaining freedom, freedom of thought, of choosing one's own path. But as Freud noted, this path to autonomy is rarely free from deep emotional conflicts, especially when it comes to the relationship with the mother. In childhood, the mother represents the entire world. She is the one who welcomes, guides, protects, and meets the most basic and subtle needs. This bond is so strong that, for the child, separation seems unthinkable. Maternal love is experienced as total, almost symbiotic. However, for the full development of the personality, this initial fusion must be broken. The child needs to separate, build their own identity, and assert their will in the face of the world. This natural movement of separation is vital, but it carries a heavy burden of unconscious guilt. Freud noted that the desire to break free from the mother is often suppressed because it conflicts with memories of dependence and the unconditional love she provided. Love and the desire to leave her seem, by unconscious logic, incompatible. As a result, ambivalent feelings arise. While striving for freedom, the child simultaneously feels guilt for abandoning her. This guilt, deep and hard to articulate, manifests indirectly irritation, detachment, indifference, contempt. It is easier to devalue the mother than to acknowledge that the process of growing up inevitably requires a painful separation. To cope with the guilt of separation, the child often symbolically diminishes the mother's importance. If she is not that significant, if she was not as present as imagined, then distancing from her seems more justified. This is an unconscious defense against the pain associated with parting from the first beautiful relationship in life. Freud described this dynamic in his studies on mourning and melancholia. Just as in mourning, when you lose a loved object but must move on, in the process of growing up, you lose the symbiotic relationship with the mother to claim your own identity. This loss is often experienced as an unhealing wound. Unable to cope with the pain of separation, the child tries to minimize what they leave behind. They devalue to avoid suffering, criticize to avoid longing, distance themselves to avoid confronting their own vulnerability. This behavior, though unconscious, has painful consequences. The mother feels rejected, forgotten, devalued. She feels distant from those she raised, nurtured, and protected. And often, she experiences guilt that does not belong to her, believing she failed at some critical moment. The truth is that, in many cases, the child's pain from separation is so intense that they prefer to numb it with emotional denial. Instead of acknowledging the mother's importance and suffering the necessary distance, they try to convince themselves and her that her presence is no longer necessary. This denial does not erase the original love. It simply hides it under layers of emotional protection. Love, though unexpressed, continues to exist in some silent place in the unconscious. Freud taught that to achieve full maturity, one must integrate these ambivalent emotions, acknowledging that it is possible to deeply love and simultaneously desire freedom. Without such integration, a person remains trapped in internal conflicts that destroy their most important relationships. In the case of a child who does not value their mother, we often see precisely such an emotional prison, a being torn between gratitude and the desire to break free, between love and guilt, between the need for closeness and the drive for distance. Understanding this dynamic allows a mother to view her child's behavior differently. She can see that distancing is not necessarily a sign of a lack of love, but a reflection of an internal struggle they are waging with themselves. Perhaps one day, as they grow emotionally, the son will regain the ability to recognize their mother's value with the clarity and gratitude they lack today. But even if this recognition never comes outwardly, the truth remains. Maternal love, once given, leaves indelible traces in the soul. To love is often to allow the other person to follow their own path, even if it means being momentarily forgotten. And that is such a profound form of love that it is not always immediately understood. Freud reminds us that emotional liberation requires courage. The courage to love without demanding possession, the courage to let go without denying the bond, the courage to embrace the full complexity of human feelings. Let every mother who feels forgotten today know that her presence has shaped and will continue to shape her child's life in ways she may never fully understand. Freud teaches us that the unconscious holds feelings that the conscious mind is not always able to recognize. A son's aloofness, coldness, or inability to value his mother is often not a conscious expression of ingratitude, but a manifestation of internal conflicts that he himself cannot understand. When we look at this reality through the lens of psychoanalysis, we understand that the emotional pain arising in family relationships is not born from emptiness. It is the fruit of old wounds, suppressed desires, and silent grief that have never been fully worked through. In this video, we explored 7 psychological reasons why a child may not recognize the value of their mother, reasons that encompass love and resentment, desire and guilt, idealization and disappointment. These are invisible dynamics operating in the depths of the human soul, often without full awareness by those involved in the process. Recognizing these unconscious forces does not eliminate the pain. It does not turn indifference into gratitude overnight, but it offers something even more valuable: understanding. To understand is to free oneself, to let go of the burden of unrealistic expectations. It is to stop endlessly wondering where you went wrong. It is to accept that true love is not always reciprocated as we would like, but that it still holds value in itself. Mothers who feel forgotten or undervalued today carry within them a history of silent love. It holds sleepless nights, gestures of care, words of encouragement, looks of protection. It holds moments that shaped their son's life in ways he may never know, and no one can erase that history. A mother's value lies not in the words of gratitude she receives. It lies in what she built in silence, in what she supported without applause, in the love she offered without demanding a guarantee of return. Freud said that true emotional freedom arises when we understand that another person is free to feel or not feel, to acknowledge or not acknowledge, to love or not love as we would wish, and that our value does not depend on the choices of another person. Breaking the illusion that love must always be mutual is an act of profound maturity. It is a gesture of self-respect and compassion for oneself. If today's child cannot see how much they received, it does not diminish the greatness of what was given. The love given laid an invisible foundation that supports their life, even if they do not realize it. And a mother who understands this can finally breathe easier. She can stop carrying the guilt that does not belong to her. She can recognize in herself the strength of one who loved generously, who cared boundlessly, who gave the best of what was possible in human conditions. Freedom from guilt does not mean forgetting what you have experienced. It means looking back on your history with tenderness, gratitude, and pride. It is the realization that being a mother means sowing seeds in soil that sometimes takes a long time to bloom. And even if the fruits are not visible now, they exist silent and eternal in the depths of the soul of the one who was loved. Emotional life is complex, and recognition may come late or never, but true love remains, and in the end, it defines who we are far more than applause or visible gratitude. If this message has touched your heart, remember, your story of love deserves respect for yourself before anyone else. If these reflections resonate with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to receive more stories and reflections like this one. This way, you won't miss any new content. Take care of yourself, and see you next time.